Hello, everybody. So one part of the presentation was I was hoping to actually be able to have you ask specific questions about posters or oral presentations that you're putting together. And we'd ask that you perhaps upload versions of the presentations that you had, but as of when I got over here, the website wasn't working. So if you are able to upload a version of your presentation using this second link here, that would be super helpful. And if not, when you have questions, you can practice our oral communication skills, describing our research and your problems, and you can describe them to me, and we can just, the website is working. Okay, so the website is working, so you can use this top link, which is slightly easier to type than the bottom link, and upload them if you can. And as I said, if you can't, then we'll just get to be creative and do a little bit of thinking on the fly, which is part of academic presentations. So on that, with uploading, it's a little tricky because you have to be logged in to Box, which is free for all students, so you should be good. If you haven't made one yet, you can just sign up for the USC thing. It'll be really quick and easy. But once you can see the files, it won't let you upload until you click in the top left corner. There's a thing that says join. You have to click that button, and then it will let you upload. So when you get confused and it's like, why won't let me do this? That's the answer. Great. Learning new technologies. Okay, so my name is Emily James. As Scott said, I work for the Project Management and Communications Division of the Office of Research and Graduate Studies. And for the last 4 years, in the office, I've kind of been combining my background in environmental science and my background in communication to help faculty and students present their research in a wide array of formats, from like edXUSU, which is a pretty non-traditional way of communicating about research, to each year I work with a cohort of 25 undergraduate students who present their poster presentations up at the Capitol. And so I've looked at probably hundreds. I've looked at least 100 undergraduate presentations, plus, a pile of them more as part of the research symposium and TED. So I look at these things a lot. But most relevant to you, as Scott mentioned, is I'm the main mind behind the SRS, scheduling, and all the emails that you get, but also after inheriting the symposium last year, reevaluating how it is the rubric strategy and the training aspect of the conference. So SRS is pretty cool. We have 3 goals in mind as we're planning the conference. First and foremost, we want it to be an opportunity for you to be able to practice presenting your work. We want to be providing you with training and feedback so that you surpass your faculty peers when you're presenting at conferences, academic conferences. And we want to identify and recognize the excellent work that you're doing. But it's really this second part that I personally care the most about, and that's what it is that we're going to talk about today. And even if you're not presenting at SRS, the nature of how SRS is designed to mirror an academic conference means that the practices and principles that we're going to teach you if we're doing our jobs right will transfer to those other settings. So I just want to give a little bit of context for how the judging system was set up before and why it is that we moved to this more consolidated, streamlined feedback rubric. So in the past, every presentation was visited by a faculty judge in your discipline, and that part is the same. But then there were 2 other opportunities and avenues for a student participating in SRS to receive feedback. So one of those options was the Excellent Communicator Badge that you could opt into. You could submit your posters and your slides to members of our team prior to the conference, and we would give you some feedback about the visual elements and design of the work that you did. And then if you've done an excellent job, you would get a badge that you could pin on your poster. But only like 40 students would submit their presentations, and we have over 400 people who present at the conference. So there's a huge portion of people participating that weren't receiving this information about these sorts of best practices. And then the other aspect was if you were giving an oral presentation, you were visited by a speaking fellow who was providing you feedback on your presentation, on your public speaking skills. And so only half of the participants received feedback because speaking fellows didn't visit poster sessions. So the new rubric, since the visual aspects of your poster and slide design and how it is that you talk about them are applicable to everybody, this new schema incorporates those things formally into how it is that we're talking to you about the work that you're doing. So the new rubric in theory meets 4 goals. It streamlines elements that are being assessed. So we found that certain aspects, because of the 3 different sort of channels, were coming up multiple times. And the most ridiculous of this was your physical appearance was like what you were wearing was evaluated 3 times. Whereas like, yeah, it was a problem. Whereas like then, but I don't care what color tie you're wearing. You know, like I'm the human that walks around the office typically in my socks. I understand that like what you wear, although what you wear does affect how people it does not change the quality of the mind that you're doing. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't redundantly evaluating the one things. And we wanted to ensure that we were weighting things appropriately, that saying your methods, you know, whether or not they're reputable or weighted more than whether or not you would like that. And then we wanted to broaden the usability of the rubric both across disciplines and so that like it better fit for both the sciences and the arts and humanities, and so that it was applicable for both oral and written. But in our mind, the basic things that the basic skills of being a successful presenter apply this regardless of the org format. And then we wanted an evaluation schema that was a little more emotionally sensitive. Previously, you were rated on a scale from 4, fair, good, or excellent, and as much as excellent, or probably. So that's great. So now the schema, as you can see, goes from novice to practitioner expert, with falling in the practitioner or expert category, signifying that you will be ready. Okay, enough backstory. Has anybody heard of the curse of knowledge? It's originally an economics term, but there's a social psychologist, Steven Pinker, adopted this term in a book that he published back in 2015 called The Sense of Style, which is a modern style guide for writing and presentation. And he talks a lot in this book specifically about being a successful academic writer. And what it is that he says in the book is that the main cause of incomprehensible prose, and I would argue incomprehensible research presentations, is the difficulty of imagining what it's like for someone else not to know something that you know. And I want for us to hold this idea in mind, because I would say in looking at presentations, this is the #1 place where your work lacks clarity. If you forget what it was like to learn what it is to learn, and so you no longer spell out for your audience that it took step A, that step A led to step B, step B led to step C, or even basic things like you forget that not everybody knows what SRS means, the SRS stands for. So I would, as you go through these things, and if you're looking at the rubric, a lot of whether it is that you score lower or higher has to do with the clarity and the steps. And oftentimes that isn't a problem with the fact that you haven't thought about those things, it's that you're not. Okay. So with that in mind, in this definition of research, a systematic inquiry and investigation that makes an original, intellectual, or creative contribution to discipline. The new rubric looks at 6 aspects of research. So the first aspect is 4 elements of the project. second aspect is presentation structure, which is whether or not you're telling us the process of your research in a slow or short or narrative. It's basically that like you don't have your part of it. The third aspect is the need for the project, and going back to that idea that you should be making the successful research and how you do it, also the studies that you're doing your skills and procrastinate. Part 4 is the knowledge of the project. So this is like your ability to tell us what it is you know. And then the fifth aspect is looking at the design of your focus and slides themselves. The last aspect is the skills of public speaking. So the course forward is I'm just going to go through the rubric, kind of element by element, and this is where you have the opportunity to say, this is my individual problem. Where would I fall on this? How can I do this? How can I make this better? Just by a show of hands, did anybody upload their stuff? What did you do? Actually, verbal communication. Here we go. Okay, so part 1 is core elements, and so these are your basic research, the basic elements of a successful research study or project. So the question and goal, the process and methodology. And one thing that you'll notice as we move through, like through the process to where it is that you fall, that on the extremes, it's like it doesn't exist at all, and it's like completely unclear, versus it's like clearly stated and of an effective scope. And the reason why we include scope in this question or goal is, well, the question of scope will be very in your research appears in multiple contexts. So you might be answering a brand new question, but the question is like so small that even though it's new, it's not any sort of like impact on your field. So even though it's like innovative and new, the overall impact isn't significant, and you want to define that. And then the other aspect of scope is, so say you're giving an oral presentation on a super complex research. And in this format, you have 8 minutes to give your presentation and 2 minutes of questions. So whereas at another conference, you have 40 minutes, and here you have 8 minutes. We want you to be thinking about how it is that you can scale what it is that you're communicating, both up and down. So in terms of process and methodology, again, we see absent, unclear, present, super clear, and then in the middle, these aspects of looking at whether it's the proper methodology for answering the question, whether you provided sufficient detail, or so that someone can understand this is the are you telling A, B, C, N. And then this last aspect in the expert category, we have this line whether it's elegant and consistent. And this goes back to this idea of moving the field forward. That you can have an established methodology or process that's kind of been like tried and true to answer a question. But part of successful research is thinking about how you can use the skill or technique differently, or in modify those things, and that advancing research has as much to do with answering the questions as it does with advancing it. So we want for you to be thinking about those things as well. And then the third aspect, findings and results, again, not there at all, stated. And you see the difference here between practitioner and expert is the level of insight that it provides. So this kind of relates up to scope in a different way. It's kind of the, this is like A, and then if there were an arrow, this would be part B. Did your question, did you think about scope and beyond the question, and are you thinking about the scale of your impact? Does anyone have any questions about that before I move on to the next? Or, yeah, okay. So you invested different amounts of different products and okay, so the pop-out answer is that's highly dependent upon your predicted I would say that generally, it's important for us to know what the research question is, because if you don't know what the research question is, everything that follows after that is. So clearly establishing the research question is a really important foundation. I think depending upon how complicated your methods are and whether it is that your methods themselves are what is innovative or new, you can weight the methods section is something that you can reduce if your methods are pre-established and common in your field. If they're not, then you might I oftentimes I don't think that it matters in 8 minutes the ins and outs, except after you the ins and outs of the statistical analysis that you're doing, just like tell us what your results are, and then I think that it's important, it's just like the conclusions and outcomes moving forward. So minutes for each one of those things, maybe like this is kind of arbitrary. Minutes for introduction, 1 minute for methods, 2 minutes for results, 2 minutes for conclusion. That doesn't allow us to 1 minute you can allocate or shift around. Does that make sense though? Or see how it is that you can think about your particular study and how, and maybe like your results are pretty straightforward, so you don't need to spend a lot of time on them. And it's like the methods and how it is that the results are applied. Yeah, so generally, I feel like the background applies in your statement of question, that providing, and this comes up later in the rubric, that providing a little bit of context for how it is that your question is being built, and that's kind of why I would wait the establishing of your question a little bit more heavily, because questions that feel like nodding your head vigorously. All right, great. So the second aspect of the rubric is presentation structure, and there's 3 aspects to the structure that we're asking for you to focus on: flow and order of information, the text, and the relevance and appropriateness of the visual elements. So these are, graphs, tables, and so in terms of flow and order of information, we're basically looking at how relevant is your crafting research. So these are things like, do you start from the beginning and end at the end? And are you giving us a little breadcrumbs and transitions to the so ways that do this is by having strong transitions and clear headings. So in some cases, in terms of poster presentations, you might have things like introduction, if you're doing science, introduction, methods, results, and conclusions. That's pretty standard. But thinking about how everything on the poster, you might utilize subheadings to be able to tell more of the story. That under introduction, you might add you might say introduction, and you might have a subheading that background, and that's like a little historical paragraph about how it is. And then maybe perhaps another subheading that says specifically the question, so that as it is that you're scanning through, you can say, okay, introduction, and that text would be gnostic, and then you have a subheading out. So that at a glance, you can get a feel of how it is that you would do working on. And how cohesive and how communicative can you do it, and what whether you're 1 or whether you're 4. So in terms of looking at the text, this is basically just intertext using basic skill of good writing. Spelling errors, you have subject, verbs, sentences, so that it's coherent. I think if the concept is that not my topic, read, things like that. And then one aspect that sort of reflects expert is whether you're reflecting the language of your applicant. And that's not so much like, oh, are you using that's actually not what we're after, but each discipline kind of has their own like style and things like that. Are you familiar with whether or not you're Chicago or MLA or all of that, but whether you're working. And then the last element, appropriate relevance and appropriate elements. So this is like, if I'm using what you have I put a picture of anything on the photo? Or did I put a picture of sunshine? And it wouldn't necessarily be that extreme in terms of images, but are the images that you're using have you synthesized your data that from like something that's in a table, if it's like a big table with a lot of stuff, and then always like focusing on whether or not the individual elements that you use. So just because you have this 100 column table of data, like if your poster was just a 100 column table of data, that doesn't actually help us. So are you visual elements always so that we know more? Any questions for this section? So in the past, we've done several of the past series have been like the visual elements of these things. So if you go to the website, you get previous events, you have on archive all the documents for that you can helpful things. Two are about slide design, two are about, I guess there's two are about slide design, two are about design, and one is specifically about so that can be more focused, more focused. Oh, sure. It's brits.usu.edu / previous okay. It's yeah. And you can follow us email. You can send a follow-up email to all of you. So part 3 is we're evaluating. So this is where the background and context that you asked about earlier fits in on the rubric. We're looking at the quality of the study or project design. So arguably, these things could have been these 3 aspects that have been crammed into that 4 elements structure, but because we wanted to kind of like the 4 elements is kind of like focused on the project itself and the kind of stuff. So to answer your question, do you think that it's important to provide background context to what's going on in your field, what's going on in the world, or why it is that you're this is where having completed a literature review and knowing, breaking it down to how much of that literature we will talk about, and you could have read papers and what it is going on, but two or three of them are what for the students, so don't tell me about all 50 papers, only a few of them ended up being used. The second aspect of quality of the years of project is looking at whether or not you're following reputable methods. So, great, we found these findings, but there were no control variables. And super cool that, I don't know, having like an example on the fly. So, but here's my people, I just and this aspect here is innovative techniques that advance the field of study. So you could have like a fantastic project looking at the growth rate of two plants, like whether or not it's growing better with more water, and that same method could have been applied to like 100 plants. You use it on a new one that is advancing the field, but that is different than what then coming up with like a new method or like new concepts. And we do value innovation because that's part of what research is. And then the conclusions and outcomes range from not having them to having what the degree to which they added to the field, and whether or not you have a clear vision for how it is forward. Being able to translate what is found into action.
So, as I'm thinking about this and thinking about some of the projects I've got going on, honestly, there's part of me that's like, I don't know if this really is innovative, or like, it is kind of a common question, but, there's so my question is, how much of the difference between effective and expert in these last couple of things are intrinsic to the project and completely modified by the presenter, or how much is it the way you present it that makes it effective?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think some of it is just the nature of the project. And I don't want it to seem like it's bad that every time it's not bad that every time you're doing research, you're not like doing something so I would just I think to be a practitioner is to be a expert. I think that the expert category is like the bar is pretty high because I love it. But I do think that it's possible for you as a presenter to maybe you might have added like on the problem that you stand out or even saying like having done this in a tried and true way, speaking about the future directions might be a way to make that my biggest thing is tried and true way. And having like done that, I had this thought of I would like to try. And speaking to I think another question that people can ask sometimes is like I did this great study, we used all these new methods, but my results came back and they weren't significant. Does that mean that like I failed, and I think that it's I feel the same. I feel like it's the same. I haven't failed, but it is asking me to do something. I don't know if try to strike the balance in what it is that we're evaluating. When you look at these things, like half of them, 3 of the aspects are about like the actual project itself, and 3 of the aspects are because it is that balance of Any other questions? Okay, so the 5th part, this is evaluating your knowledge of the project, so kind of referring to the conversation that we've already had. So are you able to reference literature from the field? Do you add to the visual aid? And are you able to answer questions? So being able to reference literature from the field goes back to that idea. We don't want for you to put every single source on your but as you have like questions, as someone asks you questions, are you able to follow on this article, or this graph, this methodology, and make those decisions about what parts of knowledge that you have in course and support what it is. And you can see, there's a difference between what you might be familiar with and having a considerable knowledge of. So then, added to the visual aid is you're clearly not going to be able to put all the images on a poster or a slide. But are you able? This is looking at whether or not you're able to keep that contemporaneously and make those decisions on what to add. Again, when you ask your butterflies or any questions. And it also kind of looks at whether or not you guys are knowing what it is to actually put on the poster. You have to, are you just like reading it, or do you know what's behind you? And when the question comes up, you can say, well, this graph that I've already put on here is a great way to explain this. Let's go with some of this aspect so you're not here about you're going here is the aspect of where it is that I picked out. And ability to answer questions, which is this is intuitive, clear when someone gives them an answer to something, and it's clear when people are versed in their knowledge and not only just say, they can not only answer specifically what's asked, but say, and then this relates in the broader context this way, or you might also find this interesting. Questions? Great. Okay, so the last aspect is the 5th aspect is the visual aid itself, which I find that this is a place where people oftentimes have a lot of questions for. Ask for like the how it is to use, how it is to execute these measures. And like I said, the resources on the GRIPS website are super helpful, but I'm also happy to some questions that you do. They're interested in the readability, the layout, and the images. So readability relates to whether or not you're utilizing things like effective headings with tiered hierarchies where like major headings are larger, your subheadings are slightly smaller, and then subheadings smaller after that. Whether you align things in a way with consistent implications, whether your text is aligned to the left side of the column, whether you're utilizing techniques like contrast and colors so that the images and figures are actually readable, putting gray on white is hard to read. And whether in looking at your text, you have broken up your text in a way. So this is this 4th point down here. Now this would have super long paragraphs where the expert would have short and bulleted. In terms of oral presentations, one way that you can also the readability of your text is you using aspects of progressive disclosure, which is what it is that I've been doing here. So it would be very overwhelming to you if all of this appeared on the page at one time. It's kind of a lot of text anyways, but by moving through them like line by line, it breaks in having like the bullet points within the table if there's in terms of layout, we're looking at 3 core things. Whether or not you're using modular placement, which is where your columns end up winding up nicely together, whether there's white space or visibility, and the overall design of what it is. The one thing that might be a distracting design element is, say you study African, you study African elephants, and you decided to take some elephant head and make the opacity of it kind of like grayed out, and you have like a big elephant head behind all of your text. That would be a distracting visual element that we're trying to away from. And then in terms of images and figures, where it's like questions of whether the images are like big enough that you can actually see it. The posters that you make for the research symposium are 4 feet wide by 3 feet wide. So if you put a 2-inch picture of something on there, it's not going to be useful. We're looking at things about the quality and resolution. So when you're putting an image, when you're thinking of an image, the image needs to be 300 dots per inch. So if you take 300 dots per inch, so if you take the size of the size of the image that you want and multiply it by 300, that needs to be your size. And then whether you're leaving white space around the images, whether like the images themselves are relevant, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about the digital aid portion of the project. Do you guys have questions about strategies for layout, modularity? So I had another meeting this morning, and it was like very off, and everybody was about like they asked if anybody had any jokes, or silence, and someone directed me was BuzzFeed 79 worst dad jokes, whatever. And one of them was, I bought a pair of shoes from a drug dealer. I don't know what he linked them with, but I nice. Thank you, BuzzFeed. Okay. Professionalism employees. Lovely transition. So this aspect is evaluating your skill as a presenter. So we care about overall presence, verbal delivery, and nonverbal delivery. So this, your overall presence has to do with your familiarity, whether you seem confident, whether you're connecting with the audience, points of media, etc. And so falling in the expert column, whether you're well rehearsed, able to speak continuously, confident, and comfortable. I think that this is probably one of the hardest parts of academic presentations. This is like feeling like you're rounded up here. And then we're looking specifically at aspects of verbal delivery and nonverbal delivery that can contribute to the overall skill. So, are you articulating yourself? Are you speaking loud enough? Are you avoiding filler words? Are you speaking at a variety of vocal rates? And then in terms of nonverbal delivery, are you looking people in the eye? Do you have your fix? Do you have a pleasant face? Or do you look like because you're really focusing so hard? And this is the one place on the rubric where you're one little sub place on the rubric where those, that's it. That's the aspect. Yes, Scott.
I have another question.
Okay.
Connected, connected modeling. How would I demonstrate connected as opposed to an ML?
Sure. So I think that a poster presentation, one way that you can demonstrate connecting to an audience is, a lot of people are walking by, they someone pauses and starts to read, or a way that you can demonstrate instead of letting them continue to stand 5 feet away and staring at it, saying, "Hi, my name's Emily. You seem to be could I speak to you about it?" And then sort of inviting someone in to have that conversation. I think with oral presentations, connecting with a little bit harder to say. I think that it has to do with aspects of like, are you making eye contact with people? Are people laughing? Are you being responsive to other people? Or, you can, it's kind of doing like a little bit of crowd control, evaluating the tone of and this is really hard to do. Evaluating the tone to try and raise the energy, bring the energy down. It's not 100% in your control because and if you're in the most hilarious jokes until the best and on and relax. And if it's awkward, really get through it. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question as to maybe perception. How to balance like feeling being professional when you're presenting, maybe even for closer versus being more comfortable. I feel like sometimes I feel more comfortable in engaging with an audience. Probably drop some of what I'm feeling as professional to be get a little bit more rigid and so I feel really disconnected. Do you feel like there is maybe a happy balance to that, or maybe
Yeah, so obviously the nature of all of these things is that people's opinion is going to vary. It's probably evidenced by how I present it. It's my opinion that opting on the more like comfortable, able presenting from a place where you feel comfortable and connected ends up translating better than super rigid and professional. But I think that you can be professional while being, comfortable. And I think that if you're grounded in the work that you do and you know you have support for what it is that you're doing, then there's more tools to be more comfortable. That like maybe I wouldn't have just led with the BuzzFeed show, but since we've been chatting for like a little bit, that if we only talked about BuzzFeed. Cool. Did that help answer your question? Other thoughts? Okay.
It goes back to this closing verbal delivery and wondering if there's any place for being anxious when you're going to present. Like sometimes I go present and I feel very comfortable, and all of a sudden as soon as I get up there, get anxious, and then I can feel that my delivery isn't as great. And then other times when you're really confused, I don't know, and there's everyone's different. How would you? Do you have work out through the presentation about like clear how that would you get that with presence, right?
So I can tell you some strategies that I use when I present. So I always try and find a way that I feel like I can stand, but I don't feel where I feel safe, right? So that can be just deciding that I'm gonna like plant my feet on the ground and leaving my feet there. If I have a podium, I have no beginner. I feel really comfortable when I can move my arm. So I'll adopt this posture because it's how it is that I'm feel better. So I think finding ways that you feel comfortable standing in your body where you can say, I'm feeling anxious, I need to go back to like a place that I know is a really helpful start. I also try and build a lot of safeties into my presentation. So I don't really present with notes, honestly. Creating my follow this is an excellent business. But I practice, I have enough in my slides that if I get derailed, if I look at my slides will help me out. Either more text heavy, as my slides there, but I do, even though I'm not presenting from them, I put like notes in front of me, and when giving presentations on slides, I have notes in presenter mode, and so that I can know what I'm do. So I try and build in tricks for myself in case I get derailed. I always try and have one good joke. Sometimes works and sometimes makes it worse because if you tell the joke and then it falls flat, then you're like, and then another thing for me is when I get nervous, I tend to get really bad coughing mouth, and when I become super aware of the coughing mouth, exacerbates it. And so a really great reason is apple juice is actually one of the beverage that helps eliminate coughing mouth best. So if you drink apple juice about 20 minutes before you it helps alleviate it, and I keep the apple juice with me to drink while I'm presenting. So that helps. Yeah. So I would say I would try and have like a 30 to 45-second elevator pitch. So when the person comes, it's like if they the amount of time that someone will choose to say your poster is not especially if you're at a conference that has a lot of different represents about it. So have a short elevator pitch for the person that stops by, but then isn't going to be consistent. And in the elevator pitch, make sure you're touching on things that people could ask on, and then so I would kind of have a couple of like chunks that you feel familiar with, and then make it easy. Which is those What could I do better? Looking at the rubric, so I should say, this is obviously the first, I started working on this after the symposium last year. This year is the first year that we're using the rubric for the symposium, and I've actually been working with Scott. We're actually doing a study on the rubric so that we can learn things together. So I really am super open to you looking at them and saying, this doesn't make sense to me, I see this problem, you could do this better. I would have to really love that if you gave me a critique. So here's my email. I'm Emily James. Here's my email address. James@usc.edu. Feel free to email me if you have questions or call. Scott, do you have anything to?
Only evaluation, so if you've got any comments, we would like to get an evaluation on this. If you're ready and you want to, then put it in the thumbs up or thumbs down box at the end. I believe this is our last trip of the year. So, hope you enjoy the entire set of bricks. Is this your first one? Sorry.
The time's usually off for me.
But thank you for attending and joining me in thanking Emily. We'll see you hopefully all at the Symposium. Yep.